Welcome back to my channel for another Leica episode. And in this episode, I will provide tips and tricks for Leica D-Lux 8 shooters. And I personally find the D-Lux 8 a super interesting camera for various reasons. First of all, it's clearly an entry-level camera into the Leica world. Its price tag is so much lower than what you pay for a Leica SL3 or SL3S or for the Leica Q3 cameras. But it's a highly capable camera. And I've posted some time back my introductory video on the D-Lux 8. I had the camera already weeks before the official announcement from Leica. They gave it to me for testing it out. And I always enjoy shooting with this camera. And I think it's also fair to say that although it's not counted into the pro camera camp in the Leica lineup, you can nevertheless professionally take photos with this camera. And in particular in reportage, you know, maybe also in food blogging, in street photography, travel photography, this is a highly reliable companion which you can have in the pocket of your coat and which will never let you down. And I think there is a second reason why this camera is super interesting, namely that it is like a mini copy of the Leica Q3. So this is my Leica Q3 43mm with an aposumicron 43mm widest open f2.0. But of course, the Q3 43 and the Q3 28 have exactly the same design. And see here how the D-Lux 8 is imitating in almost every detail the design of a Leica Q3. And it doesn't stop there. Also from the graphical user interface and in the way you operate the camera, in the way you do the settings in the menu, it's exactly the same experience. So that means if you enter the Leica world via a Leica D-Lux 8 and learn how to master this camera, you will immediately be able to master the much more expensive and with a much larger sensor, namely 36x24mm Q3 cameras. And if you look at that design here, is kind of exactly the same. Customizable function buttons, play button, 4-directional control button, a button in the middle to push, a center button, a menu button, a shutter speed dial on top, a shutter release button. We have here a control wheel which can be customized. We have the same control wheel here. It has also a center button on both cameras. So it's kind of exactly the same. There is one difference from the top, namely that this mechanical element here is used for zooming in and out. And here it's for switching the camera on and off. And the on-off switch on the Leica D-Lux 8 found a different place, which is sitting here above this top side control wheel. And then of course we have on the D-Lux 8 conveniently a couple of more mechanical elements which we don't find on the Leica Q3, and that's an aspect ratio switch here. This is a 3:2 aspect ratio, then we have a 16:9 aspect ratio, then a 1:1 which is a square, and then the native aspect ratio of 4:3. That's the way it works. And here we have a switch to change from autofocus to autofocus in close-up and to manual focus. And these two mechanical elements plus the on-off switch, which is isolated here and on the Q3 sits integrated in the shutter release button. These are the mechanical differences we have on that camera body. Where the cameras are really different is when it comes to the sensor. Here we have a full frame sensor, 60 megapixel, 36x24mm. And here we have a much smaller sensor, of course, and the lenses. Here we have a prime lens, aposumicron 43mm f2.0, or in the other Q3 camera, a Lumix with 28mm and widest open f1.7. And here we have a zoom lens, and that zoom lens is a DC Vario Lumix, widest open f1.7 to 2.8, so it doesn't have a constant aperture. I'll show you in a moment what that means. And the full frame equivalent focal length, if we want to compare like for like with 43mm or 28mm and the other Q3 here, gives you here in this tiny little zoom lens, which is nicely integrated in the camera body, a lot of flexibility because it's covering focal length spectrum from 24 to 75mm, which is quite something. So here the two cameras are really different. And we have here in the same way as in the Q3 cameras an aperture ring that clicks. Listen to the sound. Very nice. And we have also an aperture automatic setting here where the camera chooses the aperture for you. I will later in a tip recommend never go into this setting. And you have here the focus ring, which is buttery smooth, no noise, no scratching, no nothing. Really cool. And you have here, of course, I showed this before on that switch, autofocus macro and autofocus macro, or close-up. You would probably call it close-up. It's not a real macro shooting you have here. And that is integrated here on the Q3 cameras in this ring which you turn. If I turn this macro ring here, the distance scale will switch and I'm in close-up distance. And that's the differences we have on these cameras. But otherwise, almost completely identical. And when I later go into the menu of this camera, everything I will show you, almost everything, you will find in the same way in the two Q3 cameras. All right, that was my little wrap up on the D-Lux 8 in comparison to the Q3 cameras. And I think now is time to go right into the topic, putting the Q3 43 aside, focusing on the D-Lux 8 and providing some tips and tricks, settings you might want to know, in particular if you have just recently purchased this camera and want to have some guidance in the way how to operate it. Let's kick this off. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please do so, subscribe, hit the notification bell, stay tuned on my content and support my work. Many thanks for that. Tip number one is never shoot in automatic aperture mode. And that means never turn the aperture ring to the red capital A. And why is this so? Well, let's think about a moment and create an example. Let's say we want to shoot Jennifer here. And then there are basically two extreme scenarios. One scenario is where I want to separate Jennifer as much as possible from a blurry background. And in this scenario, I would open the aperture widest and would very likely go into the tailor setting. The second scenario is I want to have Jennifer sharp and in focus. I want to have the background sharp and in focus. And then I would stop down the aperture in order to get a lot of depth of field. So let's pick one of the two scenarios and let's pick the one where I want to have Jennifer sharp and in focus and the background blurry and Jennifer in this way separated in the foreground from the background. And watch what happens if we switch into aperture automatic mode. I'm currently at f1.7 widest open. I'm in the tailor setting. Watch on the display, the 24mm will be shown. And now let's switch from here into the red capital A mode. The aperture here automatically stops down to an f5.6, which is really sitting in between, right? It's not dramatically stopped down. It's no longer wide open. And let me go now into the tailor setting and zoom to Jennifer up to 75mm. You see it here, 75mm. And now I can take a shot and Jennifer will be sharp and the background is blurry. Let's go into play. Look at that, looks really good. But I have wasted potential for making this even more beautiful. Because in manual aperture mode, the widest open aperture, as discussed earlier in the video in the tailor setting, at 75mm is actually an f2.8. And here it's stopped down a little bit from f2.8 to f3.2. So the camera, the in-camera scene recognition didn't really get it right in the optimal way. It's not bad because f3.2 is still open if you think about a 75mm telefocal length, but it is not widest open. And if I switch back here into manually controlling the aperture, it actually gives me an f2.8. And that's actually what I want if I want to separate Jennifer from the background, making the aperture as wide open as possible. And that's an f2.8 and not an f3.2 as we see it here now. And that's one of the reasons why I think you should never leave aperture control to the camera. There are other reasons, of course, because the aperture is a main instrument for steering your creativity. And here I think my tip number one ends: avoid the red capital A on the aperture ring. Use it on the shutter speed dial, because here shutter speed automatic really makes sense. And the semi-automatic mode, where you control manually the aperture and where the shutter speed is controlled by the camera, is actually one of my most frequently used shooting modes. So that's a meaningful red capital A. That's a bad red capital A. Don't use it. Tip number two concerns the size of the focus field. And that focus field here currently is pretty large for tiny little Jennifer. And in many situations, and one example would be, for instance, close-ups to an insect sitting on a flower, you want to have that focus field smaller. And there is a way to do this very quickly, but there is a prerequisite which need to make sure is switched on. And that's here under focusing. And here we have touch autofocus. And if touch autofocus is activated, you can actually tap and hold that focus field. Then you get here tiny little red arrows. And with that control wheel here, you can change the size. And there are a lot of sizes. So this is smallest here, but then you have, so this is size number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. You see, you can make this very, very big. I recommend for most shooting situations to keep this at the smallest size for precise focusing, and it will not work. Let's make it a little bit bigger so I can easier tap and hold it in a moment. If here touch autofocus is not switched on, let's deactivate it for a moment, then you cannot tap and hold. You will not get these red arrows. So make sure you activate touch autofocus first, and then you can change conveniently the size of your focus field. Tip number 3 is about customization of control elements. And I pick illustratively here one customizable function button. And this one is preoccupied and is switching if you press it once into the video mode. And if you press it again, it toggles back into the still image mode. And if I want to change that function, I can actually choose from a very long list. I can press and hold that button, and you see it's currently in toggling between photo and video, but I can also have totally different things which I assign to that button. For instance, drive mode. Let's look what I like here. Let's see. Touch autofocus is a nice one because, you know, I typically switch off touch autofocus because it's a very sensitive touch screen, and focus field is never where you want it to have when you have your nose on the LCD and your eye on the electronic viewfinder. So let's get touch autofocus here on that button. So if I toggle it once, it gives me the control to switch on touch autofocus or even touch autofocus and release. And I can also switch it off again. Now, why is this useful? If I don't like to have touch autofocus here, like in most situations in my particular case, I can now tap here somewhere. My nose can touch the screen. When I have the eye on the electronic viewfinder, nothing happens. But if I want to resize the focus field, for instance, I press this once here. I go into touch autofocus. I can resize my focus field. Let's do it quickly. Make it a bit bigger. And then I tap here again and switch off touch autofocus, and again, nothing happens, no harm if I accidentally touch on the LCD here. There are plenty of other functions here. Let's press and hold. It's a very long list, and let's make one more example. Let's go to focus mode here, and I can switch focus mode in a menu, for instance. So here I have autofocus single, and then I have here intelligent autofocus and autofocus continuous, and in this way can activate whatever I want. But I can also do this now via this button in the way I just customized it. I press it once, then I get the same choices: autofocus single, autofocus continuous, and intelligent autofocus. And that's the way it works. That's the way how you can assign functions to customizable buttons. And there are a few of them here. You can also customize control wheels. Let me make you one example. There is one here. Let's go here and let's go to the thumb wheel. It's this one here. And there you can, for instance, say is off. Let's do this. And then no matter how wild I turn this control wheel here, nothing happens. If I go back into the menu, go to the thumb wheel, say auto, then the camera assigns values. For instance, whether I'm in shutter speed priority or aperture priority. I can have exposure compensation here. And let's go back into live view. And then you will see here how I can steer my exposure compensation. Look at that. Now it gets darker. Here it gets brighter. On the right hand side, of course, let's go back to 0. And the last option I have here, I think, is ISO. Let's go here again, and then it's ISO. And then if I turn it, it says here now an ISO 100. I came from auto ISO. Now I'm ISO 100, and I can make my ISO values larger. That's the way it works. So you have a bunch of options in the menu to customize control wheels and buttons. And I think with these two examples, you have all the instruments you need to actually set up the camera in a way that it best replicates your own workflow and your personal needs in the way you do your shooting. Tip number 4 is understanding the full spectrum you have on shutter speed choices. And currently I'm here on automatic for shutter speed. I steer my aperture manually, as we discussed before, and the shutter speed is left for the camera decision in the same way as ISO. Here I'm on auto ISO. So this is a so-called semi-automatic mode. And the question now is, on the shutter speed dial, you can go as fast as 1/2000 seconds, and you can go as long as 1 second here, if you see. But what if you want to go longer? Well, you go here to 1 plus, and plus already indicates that you can go longer here. So we tap here, and then here we can, by touch functionality, go as long as 60 seconds. Have a look here, 40, 50, 60 seconds. Then I come into the so-called T mode. But 60 seconds is what I can choose here. And that's the way to go longer. It's just no longer shown on the shutter speed dial, but no worries. Of course, you can shoot long exposures with that camera. 1 second is not end of story. I'm now back in the automatic mode for the shutter speed, and I go now as fast as 1/2000 seconds. And it updates this here. You see 1/2000 seconds. But what if I want to go faster? Well, I tap on it, and I already reached the fastest possible shutter speed. I'm here on the very right-hand side of the scale. And the only way to go faster is actually to go into the menu and to go to shutter type. It's on page 3, and switch from mechanical to electronic. Watch what happens. Let's go back into the menu screen here. And now if I tap on that, you see I can go much faster. See, 1/4000, 5000 seconds, and so on. I can go as fast as 1/16,000 seconds under electronic shutter. Now, be warned about that. Electronic shutter means that the readout time of the sensor will play a crucial role, whether moving subjects will show some diagonal distortion. And I can tell you the sensor in the Leica D-Lux 8 has not a really fast readout time. So that means if you stand on the side of a street and a bus or a car passes by and you shoot with electronic shutter, that car or bus will get diagonally distorted and the image will not be usable. So be careful with electronic shutter. Use it only for still image scenes where moving subjects are non-existent at all or are very tiny and small at the far horizon. Then you can use electronic shutter. In all other situations, I recommend not using it. Now there is a third setting here in the menu under shutter, and that is here the hybrid setting. And the hybrid setting is a convenient one, because the hybrid setting means the camera automatically switches into electronic shutter when you want to go faster than 1/2000 seconds. So let's do this here. Let's go to 1/2000 seconds. Let's go into the status screen. So we have it here, 1/2000 seconds. Let's tap. And now I get the same option as before under purely electronic shutter. I can go slower, but I can also go faster, up to 1/16,000 seconds. And that's a convenient setting. And I know a lot of people who have this here under shutter type on hybrid. But again, second warning, if you are on hybrid and you go here, let's go here, you go here faster than 1/2000 seconds without being conscious that you are now operating under electronic shutter and you have moving objects, moving subjects in the scene, you will get these distortions from rolling shutter effects. And that's why I think it's actually better to consciously switch here from mechanical to electronic and avoiding hybrid under all circumstances. Don't leave it to the camera if you, without thinking, go faster than 1/2000 seconds to switch into electronic shutter without you knowing. That's why I recommend, if you think you can live with shutter speeds as fast as 1/2000 seconds, always go for mechanical. If you want to have it faster, go to electronic, but be conscious about rolling shutter effects and avoid the hybrid setting. Tip number 5 is about image overlays. What do I mean by image overlays? Well, we have here exposure information and we have here a histogram, and you can actually steer in the menu what you see here. And this is in the menu. If we go here to capture assistance, in many camera systems by many brands, this is called image overlays for live view. Here it's called capture assistance. And we have here grids, zebra, level gauge, that's for level metering the camera. Histogram is currently on, and clipping. That means if you have overly bright areas in the scene, the camera will make these parts of the scene flashing, so you are aware that here information is clipped away because it's overexposed and overly bright. And we can switch this all off and have a look at the live view, and then the histogram is gone. And I recommend using these capture assistants only if you really need them. So for instance, if you are having the camera on a tripod and you want to level meter it, go into that menu here and switch on level gauge. And let's go back into live view. And now you have the information here, whether the camera is correctly level metered on the tripod. You see these green, red lines, depending on whether I have it correctly level metered. And if you are done with that, switch it off again. It's only a distraction, right? You don't need to have it on all the time. If the camera is level metered once on the tripod, that's good enough. If you have difficulties with image composition or want to have some grids on the live view to give you orientation, then maybe switching the grids on is a good idea. Let's go back. And now we have a 3x3 grid here. But in many situations, this can also be irritating, and then it's better to switch it off. Going back here, switch it off. And the same, I think, is true for clipping. Clipping always makes me super nervous when it starts to flash on the screen. I don't really like it. And the histogram is very useful, of course. But in certain situations, you might not want to have it. And then just switch it off and live with a minimalistic, clean screen, giving you only the exposure information. This is what you want: your shooting mode, aperture priority, your auto ISO, your aperture, your shutter speed, and the exposure compensation. That's what you need for your basic shooting. And focus on the image composition and don't make yourself nervous. If in the extreme here, we activate them all, then the screen becomes super, super messy. Have a look at that. Now we have histogram, we have a level gauge, we have grids, we have clipping activated and zebra. So we have a lot of information on one tiny little LCD screen. And over all this information, we might lose focus on the most important thing in photography, which actually is the image composition. And by the way, now that we covered image overlays and capture assistance, there is also a way to toggle between different display representations. Here we have, as I showed before, the basic exposure information and the shooting mode, aperture priority, ISO information, all of that. If I press the center button here once, I get more information on that screen. And I see also now that I'm autofocus single, for instance, auto white balance, and so on. If I press it another time, I get a completely clean screen, no information at all, just my focus field. And that is good if you really want to see the full frame. And then I toggle back into that mode I showed all the time. So there is also here something you can do with the center button if you push it and change your display representations to your liking. Tip number 6 is a very important setting in the menu, which is easily overlooked, and it concerns exposure preview. Let's create a little storyline to make this more tangible. Let's say you are a photo enthusiast. You bought the Leica D-Lux 8 as your first Leica camera, an entry ticket, if you want to say so, into the Leica world. And you manage and master fairly well semi-automatic mode. So you're shooting here in a mode where you set the aperture manually by yourself and the shutter speed is figured out by the camera. You also have decided for an ISO of 100. So in the light triangle, you have two parameters determined yourself: the aperture value and the ISO, and the shutter speed is left for decision to the camera. And now you finally think it's time to go into fully manual mode. And you would expect in fully manual mode that if you turn now the aperture dial, that the exposure preview changes in terms of brightness and darkness. And you go to 1/2000 seconds, it's still as bright as it used to be. You go to 1/1000 seconds, you go as long as 1 second here. Let me show you. And it's still the same brightness. But you learned as a photo enthusiast that in the light triangle, you control your exposure and light via ISO, which is 100, via aperture, which is f1.7, and via shutter speed, which is now 1 second. So what the heck is going wrong here? Why is it not updating the live view? And the reason for that is the following. There is an important setting here in exposure preview that's currently on program mode, so automatic mode, aperture priority, and shutter speed priority. But it has not an M for fully manual mode. So what you need to do is you push the center button here once, and then you are in PASM, means in the automatic mode, program mode P, the two semi-automatic modes, aperture priority and shutter speed, and the fully manual mode, you will get the full exposure preview. And watch what happens if I now go back into live view. It's super bright because you're on 1 second. And now if you turn that dial here, it will actually, the faster I make my shutter speed, the less bright the scene will be. And now you can figure out probably 1/250 seconds is the right exposure here, maybe somewhere in between 1/250 and 1/500. And now you can take the shot, and your exposure preview is finally working in the way you expected from everything you learned about the light triangle. It's a setting here which is very likely that people overlook this, but if it is not activated, you have no effect in preview if you turn the shutter speed dial in that particular constellation. So be conscious about that. And I made it a habit when I initialize a Leica camera for the very first time, be it a Q3, a Leica M camera or a D-Lux camera, I always make sure I'm on PASM to have the full live exposure preview in all shooting modes I'm going after. Tip number 7 is about image stabilization and what you need to know about it. And the Leica Q3, this beauty here, as well as the D-Lux 8, they have optical image stabilization, acronymed OIS. And that means the stabilization happens in the lens. And what it means is basically tiny little vibrations and shakes a mechanism implemented in the lens can compensate for. And you can gain a few stops for longer exposure by handheld shooting. Optical image stabilization is totally different than in-body image stabilization. And in the Leica world, the Leica SL3, for instance, and the SL3S, they have in-body image stabilization. And in-body image stabilization means that in the camera body, the sensor is kind of freely floating in a magnetic field, and the camera by its sensors recognizes tiny little shakes and vibrations and keeps the sensor stable in that magnetic field. And these two image stabilization methods, they need to be distinguished. Here it happens in the lens. Now, there is also menu entry for that, a dedicated menu entry, and it's here. It's OIS, optical image stabilization. And whenever you go for handheld shooting, you should actually have this on because it will make your life easier and you can shoot longer handheld than by the usual rule of thumb, where you say 1 divided by 2 times focal length is the shutter speed you should use. And you can also switch this off. When would you switch it off? Well, if the camera is on a tripod. And I've learned the hard way in a couple of cases where I forgot to switch off optical image stabilization or in-body image stabilization on different cameras, that images, if you crop in later by 100%, are a tiny little bit blurry. And why can this happen if you have image stabilization activated here and have the camera on a tripod? Well, it can happen because the camera might think there is something to compensate for, but there is actually nothing to compensate for. And then it starts to do its magic and its voodoo, and that leads to a little bit of blurriness in the image where actually no blurriness should be. So on a tripod, have it switched off all the time. And if you are handheld shooting, switch it on. And then there is one exception. If you want to do a panning with your camera, then you can tell the camera with this setting that you are going to do a panning with the camera, which means in one dimension, the camera will not try to stabilize, but allow you to do the panning. And in this way, you have room for creativity. But handheld shooting, always on a tripod, always off, and only on exceptional cases, which will probably not happen very often to most of us. If you really want to do a panning with your camera, then you have a separate dedicated setting for that. Tip number 8 is an advice I want to give you, which will help you to extend the life of your battery. And the battery capacity in the D-Lux 8 is not super high. You typically have a couple of 100 shots, which you can do with one load or charge of the battery. And I can tell you on most cameras, actually on all cameras I know, the biggest consumers of energy are the electronic viewfinder and the LCD. And if you are not so experienced with these type of cameras and you go to the menu and find here under display settings, the LCD frame rate, you think, well, 30 frames per second, that's probably what you have in a really good 4K video. Looks good, but if you push the button, you see, wow, it's doubling. Now I have double the frame rate, 60 frames per second. So this is really cool. Let's keep it. Then you scroll further down and you find the same setting for the electronic viewfinder. Wow, cheerio. I can also go here for the double frame rate. And then whatever I see on my LCD in the live view or in the electronic viewfinder will not be lagging, will be more fluid, more smooth, and the whole shooting experience is much nicer. What I can tell you, based on what I said before, EVF and LCD are the biggest consumers of energy. this will basically get you back to the charger with your battery much quicker than you like. So leave it at 30 frames per second. I know it can be a bit distracting and disturbing if you see something lagging in the way this is updating, but I've shot D-Lux 7 and D-Lux 8 cameras a lot, and I can tell you 30 frames per second is definitely good enough for a reasonable shooting. And if you double the frame rate, your battery will need new charging much, much quicker. So keep it at 30 frames per second. Resist the temptation to give it a double frame rate on the LCD as well as on the EVF. Tip number 9 is about focus tracking, and yes, this camera actually has tracking in autofocus mode. The autofocus system in this camera is not as advanced as what we have in a Leica Q3 here or in a Leica SL3 and SL3S, but basic functionality is actually implemented and it can track. And the way to access this is here. Let's get Jennifer a little bit aside. Let's go here, and then we go, for instance, from field to tracking. And then you see the form and everything of the focus field changed, and I can lock in my focus, but it's not staying on Jennifer. So it's not really what I would understand should happen if this tracks. And the reason is that it always comes in combination with a switch from autofocus single to autofocus continuous. And now if I'm on Jennifer, I can move that camera. Look at that, 3-dimensional ways. It will stay on Jennifer's body and is sticky on her. And that's the way tracking works. And it always comes in that combination with autofocus continuous. It's, as I said, not as snappy as what we have on other Leica cameras, but it works. And if you need it, you will get a decent amount of shots, which will still be sharp if a subject is moving, if it is not super fast, and if it is not an overly difficult focus situation. So use that feature for your advantage. You also have here eye and face detection. You have here zone focusing, field we saw before under autofocus single, and so on and so on. So here on the autofocus system, it comes close to the options we have in the Leica Q3, but it is not as sophisticated, and the Leica D-Lux 8, and that's maybe the most important fact to share, has only contrast detection and no face detection, and face with a P and an H. Tip number 10, and my last tip I wanted to share in this particular video, I come to the next video in a moment, is touch autofocus and release. And that's an interesting one. Let's go here into focusing. And then we have here touch autofocus, and I demonstrated these menu entries already of touch autofocus and release. So let's quickly try this out. I have here, let's push that function button. I have touch autofocus and release activated. I have two subjects in the scene. One is the Witcher here a bit closer to the camera. The other one is Jennifer in the background. If I tap at the Witcher, the shot will be released immediately. Watch this, and the Witcher will be sharp and in focus. Let's go into play mode. Here we go. And then you see here, if I go here, the Witcher is sharp and in focus. If I decide in this particular constellation for Jennifer, I tap on Jennifer. Boom. Let's go into play mode. And then you see that Jennifer is sharp and in focus. And I had here widest open f1.7. And in some shooting situations, in some constellations, although I'm using this not very often, let me deactivate this for my own shooting. It can be convenient to have it this way. And I think it's in particular convenient if you have the camera on a tripod and are hunting for different subjects in a scene. If you have your eye on the electronic viewfinder, I don't find it personally convenient to tap on an LCD screen, on a touch screen, but you can actually do it if you want it. And there is also an option to say touch autofocus in electronic viewfinder mode when your eye is on the EVF. I'm never using it, but if you want to do it, you can do it. All right, that's it. These are my 10 tips. And what's coming next on the D-Lux 8? Well, there is one setting which takes a bit of a longer video in order to fully and proper explain it. And that's basically here on the user profiles. And there is always a lot of confusion about user profiles. I intend to make a video, maybe 10-15 minutes about that, but I didn't want this video to become any longer. It's long enough. So if you're interested in the D-Lux 8 and how to set it up, how to use it, how to operationalize it for your own workflow, stay tuned and don't miss that video. All right, I hope you liked that presentation. The D-Lux 8 is clearly a fully fledged Leica camera. It smells like Leica, it feels like Leica, it shoots like Leica. It's designed like the Leica Q3. It has kind of the same menu structure and graphical user interface, and it's a perfect camera for people who travel and who want nevertheless high image quality and a lot of options and features embedded into the camera. In this video, I hope I could show you some things which you might have known but needed a refresher, or maybe some things you had not known before. In any case, I hope if you liked that video here, please drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel. There's always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy. And of course, peace out.